Welcome to the Beer Taster's Notebook, the show dedicated to learning about beer. I'm Jonathan Thompson, advanced cicerone, beer judge, home brewer, and beer writer. Welcome back to the Beer Taster's Notebook podcast, episode 10, Thiols. So today we're going to round off the yeast-derived aromas, the good ones that is, with Thiols. They've gained a lot of attention as of late, spawning clever names like the X-Thiols, Thiol Be Back, or Thiol Have What She's Having. Okay, I made that one up. Anyways, they're not new by any stretch. So that characteristic New Zealand Sauv Blanc aroma profile is largely due to Thiols. And some work done in Japan revealed their importance and in those big tropical flavors. And then in the early 2020s, the beer world sort of caught on. And so Thiols, as far as the taster is concerned, are these big notes of like passion fruit, guava, grapefruit zest, blackcurrant, and the Sauv Blanc type white grapes. Cat pea's also thrown out there a lot. It's a strange descriptor, and we can talk about descriptors in a bit. And as I'll continue to say, sometimes it's like the end of the shift, like, oh, well, close enough, right, when it comes to these aroma descriptors. So some of the not so good thiols can be like onion, garlic, rubber, burnt match. I think cat pea kind of straddles the line. I mean, I understand where they're coming from there, but I don't know if necessarily that's something I'd call a desirable characteristic. Anyways, okay, so what are they then? So thiols are a sulfur-containing aroma compound. To be specific, they're an organosulfur with a sulfhydryl functional group, which is a hydrogen and a sulfur together, then bonded to the rest of the molecule. So they have a very low detection threshold. In fact, they make up only 1% fraction of the hop oils. They oxidize quite easily. They bind to metals, and they are extremely volatile, so they can blow off very easily. Some other sulfur compounds that we're familiar with are the sulfides, like hydrogen sulfide. That's that rotting egg smell. The disulfides, like DMS, that cooked cabbage one. And the sulfoxides, like sulfur dioxide, that sort of struck match smell. Thiols are also known as mercaptans. And as mentioned, they're not really all sunshine and passion fruit. Mercaptan is actually what they add to natural gas so that bad things don't happen to good people. But natural gas on its own is quite odorless. So these are the non-beer thiols, thankfully, like tert-butyl mercaptan, methyl mercaptan, or tetrahydrothiopene. Okay, anyways, who cares about that? Back to beer. So the key thiols we want to know about as beer tasters are 3-mercaptohexane 1-ol. That's 3MH for short. That's a passion fruit kind of guava aroma. And the threshold there is around 55 parts per trillion. 3-mercaptohexyl acetate, which is 3MHA. That's kind of like a passion fruit mango. And the threshold there is even lower. It's 4 parts per trillion around. 4-mercapto 4-methylpentan 2-one, which is also 4-MMP. That's that blackcurrant boxwood. It's very common in sort of New Zealand style beers. That's about 1 to 2 parts per trillion. And then there's a few others that aren't so great. So benzyl mercaptan is kind of a coffee, smoky aroma. It's pretty, and it's in the low parts per billion as far as threshold is concerned. Methionol derived thiols are like a cooked potato type of thing, also into parts per billion. And then, light struck or skunking, that's a thiol too. 3-methyl-2-butane 1-thiol, also called 3-MBT for short. It's a lot easier to just to abbreviate these, of course. And so thiols don't really live freely in beer. Their precursors are bound to cysteine and glutathione as amino acid moieties. So these precursors are stable throughout the boil. They're soluble in wort or water, I guess, and they're completely aromaless. So malt contains some, but it's really not the main contributor. Hops are the primary source of these precursors. And so while that's nice, it's really up to the yeast what ends up happening. So the yeast needs to have a gene, IRC7 specifically, intact to code for beta-lyase enzymes. Specifically a carbon-sulfur beta-lyase. We can just call it beta-lyase, though. So the beta-lyase cleaves the cysteine-bound precursor into the freeform and then releases ammonium and pyruvate as byproducts. Certain conditions obviously need to be there as well. So producing thiols is sort of a way of generating nitrogen or liberating it, I guess. So in high fan environments, the expression tends to be kind of dampened. And this is why we see so much thiol expression in wine fermentation versus beer. The funny thing, though, is lower fan can make the yeast attempt to conserve sulfur and then ergo lower thiol release. So it gets a little bit confusing. Okay, so now let's get a bit more complicated. So hop-derived precursors are normally in the form of glutathione conjugates. And so the yeast first does a job of converting that to a cysteine conjugate form. So here we go. So the yeast pulls in the bound thiol versus permeases, usually GAP1P or OPT1P, assuming that it's the glutathione conjugate. So a gamma glutamyl transpeptidases will cleave off the gamma glutamyl, leaving a cysteine glycine conjugate bound to the thiol. Cysteine glycine dipeptidases then split off the glycine, leaving the cis-bound thiol, and now beta lyase finally gets its chance to come in and split that up. So the carbon-sulfur bond is broken, and the sulfhydryl group becomes a free thiol. The cysteine breaks into ammonium, which of course is a nitrogen source, and pyruvate, which enters the metabolic cycle. So now you can see why the yeast would actually want to do this. Of course, we all know that yeast has no interest in giving us delicious flavors. These are all for the yeast. Okay, so to make this even crazier, yeast can then biotransform the thiols into more aromatic thiol esters. So let's use 3-MH as an example. So combining it with acetyl-CoA turns into 3-MHA. This lowers the detection threshold massively, and then, of course, boosts the aroma. And this is accomplished, by the way, by alcohol acetyl transferase, which we encountered during the ester episode. And CoA is then the byproduct. So now once a thiol is liberated, the story is not really over because it's kind of like a baby leaving the nest, right? There's a world of predators out there. Oxygen can bind to the thiol, creating a disulfide. Copper, iron, and zinc can bind the sulfhydryl group, scrubbing out the aroma. And they're also highly volatile, so any heat or carbon dioxide can really just carry them off into outer space. So cold side hopping will preserve this a lot more, obviously, than hot side hopping, as we just alluded to. Okay, so let's talk about Brettanomyces for a second. It can release thiols as well, but it can also reduce disulfides back to thiols, as well as create new sulfur compounds. And the thiols released by Brett tend to be a bit funkier, which I'm sure is not a surprise. Okay, so just moving back now to yeast. So as discussed, the yeast need to have this IRC7 gene intact, but the integrity of the allele also differs. And so the IRC7R variation is full length and functional, which means that the expression is higher and therefore there's higher beta lyase activity. Most strains, however, have this IRCS allele, which is truncated. So the expression is lower, and if it's able to code for the enzyme at all, it's quite low. So English and American ale strains, for example, tend to be quite low. Saison tend to be pretty high. Belgian Abbey strains are quite low. Wine yeasts are very high, especially in Sauv Blanc. And the Brettanomyces strains can vary, but they're generally quite good at liberating these thiols and then obviously doing strange things to them. Lager strains, of course, are very, very low. And then these thiol-boosting strains, they're kind of like nuclear weapons, right? I mean, these have been specifically engineered to have super expressive IRC7. Okay, so now just moving on to the hops. You'd probably think that the fancy new hops are the ticket for thiols, but they're really not. So Cascade, Sots, Calypso, Citra are all flush with bound thiols. Of course, we can't leave out Noces and Sauvin, which is, I guess, it's kind of new, but I mean, it's there front and center. And then one more thing to mention, there are thiol boosting products out there. Phantasm is probably the most well-known, and it's essentially the dried and powder remnants of Sauv Blanc grapes. So it contains a ton of bound thiol precursors. And so that really wraps up thiols for today. Thank you for listening. If you like the show, please remember to follow, subscribe, like, rate, comment, share, etc. Until next time, stay thirsty and stay curious.